There is a quiet instant, often in the middle of an ordinary day, when your mind catches itself pretending that you are inside your skull and the world is out there. Pretending that observation is passive, that reality is a stage you simply watch. Then something slips. A coincidence too precise. A dream that answers a question you never spoke aloud. A scientific fact that sounds like heresy. At the smallest scales, what we call a thing behaves less like an object and more like a possibility, until it's measured. A Swiss depth psychologist I'll call Dr. Kaspar Jung named the hidden unity beneath all opposites the Unus Mundus, one world, before mind and matter split into separate categories. For centuries this idea belonged to alchemists and mystics. But the disturbing twist is that modern physics keeps brushing against the same cliff edge, where the observer, the measurement, and the outcome can no longer be cleanly separated. Most people hear oneness and imagine soft spirituality, candles, vague light, comforting slogans. But Unus Mundus is not comfort. It's a fracture in your certainty. Because if the world is truly one thing, then the border between inner and outer is not a wall. It's a habit. The old alchemists suspected this. They described reality as a single substance wearing two masks, spirit and matter, soul and stone. But in the 20th century, the same suspicion emerged from laboratories that hated mysticism. Physicists found that a particle does not behave like a tiny marble with a fixed identity. It behaves like a spread of probabilities, and the act of measurement does merely discover the result. It selects it. This is where the crisis begins. Because if observation changes the observed, then consciousness is not an innocent bystander. It is implicated. The universe is not simply out there, waiting. It responds. And that response is the first hint that what you call mind may not be separate from what you call world. In the early decades of quantum theory, one brilliant theorist, let's call him Elias K. Varn, became famous for his ruthless logic. He distrusted anything symbolic, anything spiritual. To him, the universe was mathematics, and human meaning was noise. And yet, Varn began to unravel. He developed violent anxiety, strange dreams, and an obsessive sense that patterns were following him. He was hallucinating. He was thinking too clearly, too deeply. Until the floor beneath his worldview gave way. When his private life collapsed, he sought help from Dr. Kaspar Jung, a man infamous among academics for taking dreams seriously. What began as therapy became an intellectual collision. Varn described quantum paradoxes that refused to behave like common sense. Complementarity, uncertainty, the way phenomena changed character depending on how you asked the question. Jung listened and recognized something ancient wearing modern clothing. The return of the one world, not as belief, but as structure. And the strangest part is this. Neither man could fully dismiss the feeling that physics and psyche were circling the same center from opposite directions. Quantum theory contains a fact that sounds like myth. Two particles can share one state, even when separated by enormous distances. Alter one, and the other responds. Not through any signal we can detect traveling between them, but through correlation that seems instantaneous. Physicists call this entanglement. And it is not rare. It is not a philosophical metaphor. It is a measurable property of matter. But entanglement does something worse than break rules. It questions the reality of separation itself. Because if the universe were truly composed of independent things, then distance should protect them from one another. Yet quantum systems behave like parts of a single organism, distinct in appearance, unified in function. Varn, the sleepless physicist, became obsessed. If the world is stitched together beneath the surface, what is the stitch made of? Information? Causality? Something deeper than both? Jung approached it differently. He asked, if physical events can be linked beyond classical cause, could meaning itself be another kind of linkage? Not supernatural, not fantasy, but a pattern that belongs to the structure of reality, like gravity belongs to mass. And in that question, a forbidden bridge forms between laboratory and soul. Dr. Kaspar Jung had a word for the eerie coincidences that feel designed, not by a person, but by the architecture of existence. He called them synchronicities, events connected not by cause and effect, but by meaning. A man dreams of a symbol he has never seen, then encounters it in a book the next morning. Someone thinks of a childhood friend they haven't spoken to in 10 years, and the friend calls within the hour. These things happen often enough to be dismissed, until they happen to you with surgical precision. Jung insisted this was time magic. It was a clue. A clue that psyche and world might share a deeper source, as if they were two languages translating the same underlying sentence. Varn, trained to hate mysticism, was disturbed by how well synchronicity matched the quantum mood. In quantum mechanics, the outcome is not fully defined until the measurement occurs. In synchronicity, the meaning is not fully visible until the coincidence occurs. One is physics, one is psychology, but both behave as if reality is not merely a pile of separate objects, but a living pattern, where observer and observed participate in the same field. This is the seed of Unus Mundus, not everything is connected as a slogan, but the terrifying idea that separation is a surface illusion. Western civilization was built on a split, a sacred divorce, the belief that mind and matter are different substances living in different kingdoms. Thought here, extension there, soul inside, world outside. This is philosophical dualism, so common it feels like air. But Unus Mundus threatens dualism the way a solvent threatens glue. If mind and matter emerge from one deeper source, then the old categories are not fundamental. They reconvenience labels, useful for survival, disastrous for truth. Varn saw dualism collapsing inside the equations. Quantum systems refuse to behave like self-contained objects. They behaved like relationships, like interactions, like probabilities waiting for context. Jung saw dualism collapsing inside the psyche. The unconscious did not act like a personal basement of repressed memories. It behaved like an ocean of symbols older than the individual. Dreams contained intelligence, the ego did author. The psyche was not a closed room. It had openings. And that is the real scandal. Perhaps consciousness is not produced by matter like steam from a machine. Perhaps matter and consciousness are both produced by something prior, something that is neither mental nor physical in the ordinary sense. Philosophers call this neutral monism, one underlying reality expressing itself as two faces. The alchemists called it the one thing. The question is not whether you believe it. The question is what changes in you when you stop pretending the split is real. To modern eyes, alchemy looks like primitive chemistry, eccentric men chasing impossible wealth. But the serious alchemists were not obsessed with metal. They were obsessed with transformation. They believed matter was a mirror, and if matter could be transfigured, so could the soul. One Renaissance physician, call him Aurelius Verdun, wrote that beneath all opposites lies a single undivided reality, a ground before the split between thought and substance. He described it as a hidden unity from which all forms emerge, like waves from one sea. For Verdun, the great work was not merely turning lead into gold. It was the union of mind with the one world, the recognition that the same principle shaping minerals also shapes dreams. Jung later recognized this language as symbolic psychology. The alchemist's furnace was only external. It was internal. Their experiments were rituals of perception, ways to force consciousness to confront what it normally filters out. And that's why alchemy keeps returning. Not because it's scientifically correct in the naive sense, but because it speaks to a psychological fact. Humans experience reality through division, then suffer from the division they invented. Unus Mundus is the forbidden antidote. But it does arrive as comfort. It arrives as fire. Every tradition that aims at awakening contains the same warning. Before illumination comes disorientation. Before unity comes dissolution. The alchemists called this phase the blackening. The moment the old identity begins to rot. It starts subtly. Your familiar story, your personality, your goals, your certainty develops hairline cracks. You begin noticing repeating patterns. The same conflict in different faces. The same lesson wearing new disguises. Dreams become sharper, almost instructional. Coincidences cluster around particular themes, like the world is pressuring you to see something you've avoided. The ego hates this, because the ego survives by maintaining borders. This is me, that is not. This is rational, that is madness. This is possible, that is taboo. But the black descent is precisely the weakening of those borders. You feel anxiety without a clear cause. You feel watched, not by a person, but by meaning itself. You feel the sense that life has turned symbolic. This is where people retreat. They medicate. They distract. They intellectualize. Anything to reassemble the old world. But if you stay, if you endure the confusion, something begins to form beneath it. A different logic. A deeper order. Not the comfort of certainty, but the beginning of real sight. If you survive the black descent without fleeing back into distraction, a second phase begins. The alchemists called it the whitening, not because everything becomes pleasant, but because the smoke clears enough to reveal structure. You start recognizing that your inner life is not random. Recurring images appear in dreams like a private mythology. A staircase, a river, a locked room, an unknown figure guiding or mocking you. At first they seem personal, but then you notice something unsettling. These themes are ancient. They appear in myths, scriptures, and folk tales across cultures you've never studied. This is where Jung's most dangerous idea enters. The psyche contains archetypal patterns, forms of meaning older than your biography. You are not inventing them. You are meeting them. Psychologically, the whitening is the stage where you separate the neurotic from the symbolic. Some inner content must be dissolved. Fear, compulsions, inherited shame. But some content must be integrated. Shadow traits, hidden vitality, suppressed intelligence. You begin confronting what you deny in yourself. Envy, aggression, desire, weakness, pride. The point is tight moral purity. The point is wholeness. Because what remains unconscious does disappear. It leaks into your relationships, your choices, your fate. And here's the key. As you integrate the inner world, the outer world changes its behavior. Not magically, but synchronistically, as if reality notices you be finally listening. Eventually, the work leads to an encounter with something that does feel like you, yet lives inside you with undeniable authority. Jung called it the inner contrasexual figure, not as a social stereotype, but as a psychological function. The unknown partner in your own mind. In men, it often appears as an inner feminine presence, seductive, prophetic, cruel, or impossibly wise. In women, it may appear as a masculine presence, commanding, judging, visionary, or destructive. The names vary across traditions, but the experience is consistent. You meet an intelligence in the psyche that has its own agenda. This is destabilizing because it breaks the ego's monarchy. The ego wants to believe it is the sole author of thought, but these figures behave like autonomous agents. They argue. They refuse control. They demand recognition. To engage them, you need a strange discipline, what the old schools called active imagination, a deliberate dialogue with the symbolic realm. Not passive daydreaming, not psychotic collapse, but structured confrontation. Here the occult re-enters with force, because occultism, at its core, is not superstition. It is the study of hidden operations, how symbols move energy, how attention shapes perception, how the unseen architecture of the psyche produces visible outcomes. And when this inner figure finally speaks clearly, you understand why Unus Mundus is terrifying. Because the other you feared in the world was never fully outside. It was always a face of the one reality looking back through you. As the dialogue between ego and unconscious deepens, reality begins behaving like it has a second layer. Synchronicities stop appearing as rare coincidences and start arriving in clusters, like a pressure system moving through your life. You think of a word, and it repeats through strangers' conversations. You wrestle with a moral decision, and the same symbol shows up in 3 unrelated places. You have a dream, and the next day delivers its echo, dressed in ordinary events. This is not proof that you control the universe. It is proof that you don't understand the universe. Jung warned that these moments are dangerous precisely because they feel personal. The mind instinctively turns them into an ego trophy. I'm chosen. I'm special. I'm receiving messages. That is the beginning of inflation, the disease of spiritual pride. But the healthier interpretation is colder and more profound. Synchronicities are brief windows where psyche and matter stop pretending they were separate. Meaning becomes visible as a structural principle, not merely a human invention. The alchemists describe this as the emergence of a third thing, neither purely inner nor purely outer, a bridge state, a liminal zone where the one world leaks through. And here the seeker faces the real test. Can you witness the storm without worshiping yourself as the center of it? Because Unus Mundus does not crown the ego. It dissolves it. After the descent, after the clarification, a third phase begins. The alchemists called it the reddening. The moment the work stops destroying and starts unifying. This is not a happy ending. It is a higher tension. The opposites you once tried to defeat begin to merge. Strength and vulnerability, logic and mystery, desire and restraint. But the paradox is that they don't melt into bland neutrality. They remain distinct, yet coordinated, like 2 hands finally working as one body. Jung called this union the conjunction, the sacred marriage. In psychological terms, it means the ego stops trying to dominate the psyche and begins serving it. You no longer manage your inner world like a dictator. You collaborate with it. The result is not perfection. It is a new center of gravity. A sense that behind your thoughts and moods there is something more stable, an organizing intelligence that isn't your conscious will. In symbols, it appears as the mandala, the divine child, the wise guide, the inner stone. Across cultures, these images point to the same experience: wholeness emerging from fragmentation. And now Unus Mundus stops being a concept. It becomes a shift in perception. You start sensing that your interior life and the world's events are not separate movies playing in parallel, but one film projected from a deeper source. At this stage, many seekers don't fail from fear. They fail from seduction. When you taste unity, even briefly, the mind wants to own it, to claim it, to convert a genuine encounter with the infinite into a personal identity. I've awakened. I am beyond others. I know the secret. This is the ancient trap Jung called inflation, when the ego confuses itself with the self, mistaking contact with the larger field for proof of personal divinity. Easy to recognize in cult leaders, harder to recognize in yourself. Inflation does always look like arrogance. Sometimes it looks like manic certainty. Sometimes it looks like a savior complex. Sometimes it looks like spiritual bypassing, using oneness to avoid responsibility, grief, or ordinary human limitations. The Gnostic teachers warned about this in their own language. The soul touches the light and then believes it has become the light. But the true work requires modesty, the recognition that you can participate in the infinite without possessing it. Varn, the physicist, feared this as well, because quantum reality humbles the mind. It refuses to give you a final picture. It only gives you better approximations. The closer you get, the more the universe behaves like a mystery that cannot be conquered. Unus Mundus is not an achievement badge. It is a dismantling. And if it does make you more precise, more ethical, more grounded, then it is realization. It's theater. If the Unus Mundus becomes more than an idea, if it becomes perception, it does not turn you into a floating mystic. It makes you dangerously practical. First, it alters your relationship with death, not by promising immortality, but by reducing the panic that comes from imagining yourself as a sealed container. You begin to sense that individual life is a wave pattern, not an isolated object. The wave ends, but the ocean remains, and was never separate. Second, your values reorganize. Status, applause, accumulation lose their hypnotic power. You still act in the world, but not from desperation. The drive shifts from proving yourself to aligning yourself, from chasing identity to embodying integrity. Third, relationships sharpen. You start encountering people less as tools or threats, and more as living centers of experience. Conflict doesn't disappear, but it becomes less possessed by hatred, because you can recognize the shared ground beneath disagreement. Fourth, your anxiety decreases, not because life becomes safe, but because your obsession with control weakens. You stop demanding total certainty before moving. You act with discipline while accepting that reality is ultimately larger than your plans. This is what the occult traditions meant by liberation, not escaping life, but escaping the unconscious compulsions that make life feel like a prison. And now the question becomes unavoidable. If separation is a useful illusion, how have you been living as if it were ultimate truth? The old alchemists hid their truth behind strange metaphors for a reason. The mind resists it. The mind wants a formula, a rule, a method to dominate the mystery. But Unus Mundus cannot be possessed. It can only be recognized. And recognition does not happen through argument. It happens through the slow removal of inner distortion, through confronting the shadow, enduring the descent, integrating the divided self, and learning to observe without clinging. This is why the physicist and the psychologist could meet at the same threshold. Quantum theory destabilizes the myth of an objective, fully separate world. Depth psychology destabilizes the myth of an ego that is fully in control. Both point to the same impossible implication. Reality is relational at the root. The observer is not outside the system. Meaning is not merely decoration. Consciousness is not a late accident in a dead universe. You are not a stranger visiting reality. You are reality, localized. The true stone was never hidden in a tomb or buried in a library. It was the awareness reading these words, the attention behind your eyes, the silent witness that has been present through every transformation of your life. And the most unsettling conclusion is also the simplest. You do not need to become one with everything. You need to stop pretending you are not.